CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories. Entente cordiale, a warm welcome for President Macron at the White House, but a row over green subsidies threatens to overshadow his state visit.
Our other headlines: Russia's foreign minister claims the United States and NATO are direct participants in the Ukraine war because of their support for Kyiv.
Special centres are set up across Ukraine, providing warmth and electricity as millions of households face power cuts.
Spain on alert. Security stepped up after letter bombs are sent to the Prime Minister, embassies and government offices.
And as Croatia and Morocco close in on a last 16 place, we'll be in Doha for the latest at the Qatar World Cup.
French President Emmanuel Macron is meeting President Joe Biden as his state visit to the United States continues. Earlier, the French leader was officially welcomed to the White House. But beyond the pomp and the ceremony, there are some tough talks to be had over a subsidy row stretching right across the Atlantic.
The US Inflation Reduction Act gives billions of dollars of funding to green businesses in America. But France and other EU members are concerned it will harm EU industries and want their businesses to be given a level playing field. On Wednesday, Macron criticised the legislation for putting the two allies at odds.
What happened these past few months is a challenge for us because we start being out of phase on energy topics, and the costs of the war is not the same in Europe and in the US. But mainly the choices made, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, are choices that will fragment the West because they create such differences between the US and Europe.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, the United States and France, of course, allies, but there is clearly friction in this trading relationship.
Yeah, that's right, Jamie and Juliet. At the heart of this friction today is something that we on this programme are very familiar with, because it is the BBB, the Build Back Better bill, this giant piece of social change legislation that the Democrats spent most of last year trying to negotiate their way through. It started off at $3.5 trillion, and because they couldn't agree amongst themselves, it got whittled down to around $800 billion. But within that is the biggest spend ever committed for climate change issues by any US administration in history. And you know that presidents always meet members of Congress before they meet the sitting president. So last night, Emmanuel Macron was on Capitol Hill, and among the things he's quoted as saying to congressmen was that you're making my life harder because of the issue that is contained within that climate change spend, because at the heart of it is tax breaks and subsidies, in other words, money being given away to encourage people to buy American, both regarding electric vehicles and solar panels, that sort of thing, and the microchips that are needed to make them. Now, Macron has realized that this aspect of the Build Back Better bill, which got renamed the Inflation Reduction Act, is likely to hurt French jobs. And as you saw at the top of the show today, he actually said the words that parts of it are in danger of fragmenting the West at a time when the West is actually unified regarding Russia's special operation in Ukraine. Now, that was quite a remarkable thing, I think, for a French president to actually say. What he's seeking today is to get Joe Biden to agree to at least consider Eurozone economies when they make major changes of legislation like this, because Macron is going to point out that the Eurozone economies and the wider European economies have been harder hit by the war in Ukraine than has this one, the United States economy. Now, it's not just France, of course, it's plenty of other countries in Europe, but Macron has become a main driver for combating Russia's special operation in Ukraine, and he is a leading spokesman, as the President of France, for Eurozone economies. As for the White House, well, they're playing it pretty cool at the moment. The White House says, look, the Inflation Reduction Act, as we now call it, is very key to President Biden's climate change goals. And they point out that there either are or there will be, before the whole thing is done and dusted, provisions in it that will help Eurozone economies. Juliet and Jamie?
John, we've been watching the pictures of obviously all of the pomp and the ceremony around the visit, but let's talk a little more about the substance. What else can we expect in terms of hard outcomes?
Well, I think the first thing to say, actually, Jamie, is to look at the affection between these two men. It's absolutely extraordinary, and indeed between the two wives as well, Dr. Jill Biden and Brigitte Macron. All four of them very happy to be in each other's company on the south lawn of the White House there. And I think it's also worth pointing out a couple of things. One is that Emmanuel Macron is clearly the king of the handshakes. He doesn't let go, does he? Once he grabs hold of your hand, I've lost count of how many handshakes there actually were today. And I think it's another thing that's worth pointing out. It may be a little unfair, but I do think it's worth pointing out that these two men are basically separated by 40 years. Macron is 44. And Joe Biden has just turned 80. So there's pretty much 40 years between these two men that you see on the screen. Now, there is another issue that Macron is going to raise with President Biden today, and that is the high price, as he sees it, of natural gas, which the U.S. is sending over to Eurozone economies to make up for the deficit coming in from Russia because of the special operation in the Ukraine. So Macron will raise that. Now, at the moment, the two men are meeting privately. So they're in the Oval Office discussing whatever it is that Macron wants to raise and vice versa. But they will have a news conference afterwards. So we should have a pretty good idea about where the two men stand on issues after that. There is talk in the air of possible tit-for-tat tariff retaliations imposed on U.S. goods by the European Union and the Eurozone economies if they're not happy with the outcome of today's meeting. But I do think you have to remember that there is an incredibly long relationship and much respect between the two capitals, Paris and Washington, D.C. And I think that Macron's main message today is going to be something along the lines of, look, we cooperate so very, very closely on combating Russia's special operation in the Ukraine. Can we please cooperate much more closely when it comes to economic issues, when you make big decisions over here, such a long way away from Europe, that affect us so badly in the Eurozone? Guys?
John, thanks for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
China's President Xi Jinping has held talks with European Council President Charles Michel in Beijing. The leaders discussed a range of issues, including China-EU relations, COVID, Taiwan and human rights. President Xi called on both sides to continue coordination, saying China is willing to hold dialogue on human rights on the basis of mutual respect. The leaders also discussed the war in Ukraine. Michel urged China to use its influence on Russia to respect the United Nations Charter. President Xi expressed support for the EU's mediation role in the crisis and said China will always be on the side of peace.
Well, trade was high on the agenda during Michel's visit, where he also held talks with China's Premier Li Keqiang. Beijing expressed hope that the EU could offer Chinese companies a fair business environment. Michel called on greater reciprocity and a level playing field, saying market access on the European side remains open, while several sectors in China are more closed.
The European Union says Twitter could be banned unless it complies with the EU's digital rules. New owner Elon Musk has been warned that the platform must protect freedom of speech, tackle disinformation and bring in transparent policies for users. The EU says it will assess Twitter's compliance early next year.
Canada has expressed concern over a European Union proposal to limit the trade in products linked to deforestation. Canada's ambassador to the EU says the rules add burdensome requirements and will hurt trade. Climate activists have called Canada's resistance to the rules shocking.
The former boss of collapsed crypto exchange FTX has denied fraud and says he's been left nearly penniless. Sam Bankman-Fried, once hailed the king of crypto, had a net worth estimated at more than $15 billion as recently as October. FTX filed for bankruptcy last month in one of the highest profile crypto fallouts to date. The company owes its 50 biggest creditors nearly $3.1 billion.
Donald Trump's tax returns have been handed to a committee of the United States House of Representatives after a legal battle. The former president fought to keep them sealed and accused the Democratic-led panel of being politically motivated. It's not clear if the returns will be made public.
The US House of Representatives has voted to block a potentially crippling rail strike, but also mandate paid sick leave for rail workers. It must now be passed on to the Senate. The strike, which could begin next week, could cost the American economy about $2 billion a day, causing chaos to freight traffic and leaving millions of passengers stranded.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead in Ukraine, special centres set up offering heating and power as millions of people struggle with electricity blackouts.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Roger,
we can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come, and this idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we try to save the world.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
This week on Razor, how saving one species can save an ecosystem. On the trail of European bison.
We have here, as you can see, a nice trail to thick vegetation here, which is done by the bison. It's one of the roads they have in nature. They basically create these pathways to thick vegetation where other smaller animals can't cross.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Russia has accused the United States and NATO of directly participating in the war in Ukraine.
Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the West had the chance to avoid involvement but chose to disregard Russian requests to halt NATO's expansion. Western countries say the proposal from Russia was unrealistic and insincere. Well, our correspondent Stuart Smith's in Moscow. Stuart, Russia's foreign minister gave a televised statement this morning. What else did he say?
Yeah, first of all, that accusation that Washington's participation in the so-called special military operation is direct and dangerous. The accusation Sergei Lavrov was levelling at Washington was that by training troops on NATO territory and also by selling weapons to Ukraine, it was in effect prolonging the conflict and also supporting what Russia continues to call a neo-Nazi regime. Sergei Lavrov also suggested that there was some blame to lay at the feet of NATO and Washington for allowing the conflict to get this far in the first place. He was referencing the discussion almost a year ago now that he says, if it had gone Russia's way, would have prevented this conflict from ever starting. Here's Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, speaking earlier.
Seeing how steadfastly the West was dragging Ukraine into NATO, which was obviously a red line for the Russian Federation, something the West knew for years, in that situation we proposed to abandon NATO's expanse in those documents I mentioned before and make an agreement about concrete, legally binding security guarantees for Ukraine, for Russia, for all European countries and all members of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
Now that makes it seem like a simple solution there, but there were of course many other issues Russia has continued to talk about, including the so-called protection of the people in the Donbass region, and in addition a couple of issues with that quote itself. There was never really the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. Informally it was known amongst NATO member states that admitting a country that already had a fight on its hands since 2014 was not a realistic prospect, and Russia knew that. There's also the other accusation that this was something that Eastern European countries would never be able to agree to, as they'd have to give up some of that protection promised by NATO. Sergei Lavrov, though, focusing on the future as well during his speech. He talked about what the status was of discussions with the US and Ukraine. He says he's always open to dialogue with both partners, but on the recent cancelled talks between the US and Russia on renewing the only bilateral arms treaty Russia and the US has on nuclear weapons, he says he thought it was naive of the United States to expect that discussions could continue while the United States continues to support Ukraine and its battle against Russia.
Stuart, I also want to talk to you about this new law which is coming into effect today, banning discussions about the military. How's that going to work?
Yeah, that's right. So there's already quite a number of laws that prevent open discussion of Russia's military actions in Ukraine, especially should it involve any sort of criticism of the armed forces there or of Russia's broader objectives. But this 60-point list produced by the Federal Security Service in Russia, the FSB, the successor to the KGB, points out a number of very specific types of information sharing that can no longer go on. That involves discussion as well as reporting. Otherwise, you could be labelled a so-called foreign agent, which has many consequences here in Russia, both financial and also in terms of freedom of expression. So the particular ones that have caught people's eye that could make things very difficult for anyone wishing to comment are the fact you cannot now comment on troop morale, you cannot talk about any crimes committed by the Russian armed forces, and there is no way to legally talk or forecast developments during the so-called special military operation. So far more restrictive. That's on top of the 16,000 detained people who have been detained for protesting against the special military operation, and around a dozen criminal cases still ongoing for those that have commented and broken existing laws.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you.
Well, in Ukraine, Kherson is without power following Russian shelling of the city, where electricity had been restored nearly 3 weeks ago. Kyiv said Russian troops withdrew from towns on the opposite bank of the Dnepro River from Kherson city. Meanwhile, Kyiv said a senior engineer at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station had been sacked for collaborating with Russia. Let's talk to our correspondent Shamim Chowdhury, who's in Kyiv. Shamim, fresh strikes on Kherson this morning. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, the Kherson Regional Administration is saying that one civilian has been killed and a medical centre has been hit. But really, this is just the latest in what have been regular strikes, shelling from the east of the River Dnipro into Kherson city since the Russians left in November the 11th, about 3 weeks ago. And it also comes as no surprise. It was fully expected. The reason for that is the Russians restationed themselves, reinforced their lines on the east of the river, and most of Kherson is actually on the east of the river, and from there they've been firing. And that's actually the reason why authorities have been trying to persuade people in Kherson city to be evacuated. It's not safe, it hasn't been safe, and it's unlikely that it will will become safe as long as there are Russians on the other side of the river. So that's really why it's being shelled. Also to add that while it is true that a number of settlements and towns east of the river have also been abandoned, left by the Russians, they are reinforcing certain positions on that side as well. And that is why they can fire across the river. Another point that I'd like to mention to you is that the Ukrainian military has also confirmed that there is an operation going on in a very thin sliver of land, a strip of land called Kinson, which is Kinbon, I should say, which juts out westwards from the southern part of Kherson city. So it's directly south of Odessa, and Russian troops have been positioning themselves there for a few weeks now. Ukrainian forces say they are moving in. We don't know any more details about that, but it could possibly be the latest flashpoint. That's one to look out for. And also, very quickly, the fighting in Bakhmut over the past few days has been very, very intense. Bakhmut has always been a critical point in terms of the fighting. The town itself is still under Ukrainian control, but we're told that Russians are about 8 or so kilometres from the outskirts. Very heavy fighting going on there.
Kyiv has sacked a senior official at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station over ties with Russia. What more do you know?
That's right. We know that his name is Yuri Chernychuk. He is one of the most senior people working under the Russians in the site. The site has, of course, been under Russian control since the start of the conflict, way back in February. Now, we understand from the Ukrainian authorities that he is a sympathizer and that he has effectively sided with the Russians there. However, we need to bear in mind that there's a good 30 or so Ukrainian nationals working in that site. We really, over the past 10 months or so, we've had very little information about how they're getting on. There have been the odd phone calls, secret phone calls that have managed to come out, and at that time the workers there, who we understand are they're Ukrainian nationals, but we understand that also pro-Ukrainian, have been speaking about intimidation and perhaps even worse. So the general feeling here seems to be, although of course it can't be absolutely verified, is that there is at least some degree of intimidation going on towards the workers in Zaporizhzhia by the Russian troops who have taken over it. The other thing we need to remember is that the IAEA does have representatives, officials in the nuclear power plant at the moment. They have been there since the beginning of September, when Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA himself, went down with a mission, and they do release periodic reports and assessments. None of those assessments have led anyone to think there is any kind of acute sense of mistreatment of workers there. However, the truth of the matter is we don't really know what's going on inside.
Shamim, thank you for that. Our correspondent Shamim Chowdhury in Kyiv.
As we've just been hearing, millions of households have been without power since last week's Russian missile strikes.
In response, hundreds of special centres have been opened where people can charge their phones, get hot food and keep warm.
Ludmila Dazuk comes to this temporary centre every day. She has no electricity at home, but at this place she has internet access throughout the day. As a sales manager, she plans to stay here until her work is complete.
I can't even imagine how it would be without this place, because my work is dependent on electricity. I'm communicating with clients from all over Ukraine using my laptop, so if I can't work, it will affect my salary. The less you sell, the less you earn.
Hundreds of these centres have opened up across Ukraine. They're known as points of invincibility and provide electricity, heat and even food and drink to everyone for free. It's part of a pledge by President Volodymyr Zelensky to keep life running as smoothly as possible in the face of missile strikes on the country's power stations.
We must endure this winter, a winter everyone will remember. We must do everything to remember not what it has threatened us with, but what we've managed to do to protect ourselves from this threat.
Hundreds of electricity plants, as well as gas and water supplies, have been struck by Russian missiles periodically since October. More than 24 have been completely destroyed.
At the moment, Ukraine is only producing 70% of the electricity it needs. Around 2/3 of that is being used to maintain essential services such as hospitals and businesses. And that is why millions of households across the country are still experiencing scheduled power cuts. And the Kyiv region is one of the worst hit.
For the elderly and vulnerable, a lack of electricity can have serious consequences. Mikola Motruk queues up in the freezing cold for a small tub of soup every day. The 62-year-old retired engineer lives alone. Without the help of local charities, he would not be able to eat.
I can't cook because I have an electric cooker, so this is my first hot meal in 2 days. The power cuts have really affected my life. At least I have cold water now, though. Before, there was no water at all. My life has turned upside down.
Authorities say it could take up to 8 months to restore the country's entire electricity grid. Until then, Mikola and others like him have no choice but to depend on the help of others to get by. Shamim Chowdhury, CGTN, Kyiv.
Spain has increased security after a spate of letter bombs posted from within the country were delivered to the Prime Minister as well as a number of government offices. The envelopes containing explosives were also sent to a weapons firm and the Ukrainian embassy in Madrid, where it exploded when opened. There have also been reports of a suspicious letter sent to the US embassy in Madrid. Our correspondent Ken Brown is there. Ken, reports of another letter bomb. What's the Spanish government saying about these incidents?
Yes, Juliet, as you say, Madrid on high alert after a series of letter bombs have been sent to various locations around the city. One of them, the US Embassy, just behind me here, and we've seen confirmation of that in the last hour on their social media. This is the 6th such explosive device sent over around the past week. The only one that has actually exploded or caught fire is the one sent to the Ukraine embassy yesterday, where one member of staff was injured. So what is the Spanish government saying? Well, today we had confirmation that a device was sent to Pedro Sanchez at his compound in Moncloa. That happened on the 24th of November, last week on Thursday. And as I say, confirmation of that only really came today. A controlled explosion disposed of that there. The Spanish Defense Ministry also said that another bomb had been addressed to Defense Minister Margarita Robles. That came from the Secretary of State for Security, Rafael Perez, on Thursday. But the overall tone that we're getting from the government here is one of calm. They're advising people to stay calm. They're saying that the security protocols are successful, that they've only seen one of 6 of these devices that has actually detonated, leading to very light injuries. So, of course, this latest one in the US Embassy means that security protocols have been activated. We have seen the streets closed here. We have seen bomb disposal experts, trained dogs in the area. Things are getting back to normal now, as you can see, traffic flowing again.
You say things are getting back to normal, but talk us through those security protocols. I wonder what kind of measures are now being taken in addition to the usual.
Well, again, this morning we had a press conference. We had a statement from the Interior Ministry. They are ordering police to strengthen security around public buildings, particularly, and also they're looking at the postal deliveries, so that a lot more cooperation between police and the postal service is going on. Rafael Perez also said he did not see it as necessary to convene the Security Committee that would decide on whether Spain's terrorist threat level would need to be elevated. Right now, that's on the 2nd highest level already, due to a lot of tourist activity over the past decade in Europe. Like I say, we have seen some terror protocols activated, the closing of roads. We saw it yesterday around the Ukrainian embassy also. But of course, the police dogs, the bomb disposal experts, we've seen all of that happening. Here, what's really, it's an ongoing investigation that has only just really begun. Analysis on these devices, too, should tell us more over the coming days.
Ken Brown in Madrid, thank you very much for that update.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the head of NATO says the alliance will step up the defence of underwater infrastructure after the Nord Stream pipeline attacks earlier this year.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference? The difference is in the detail, in the background,
defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and me, Juliet Mann. Our top stories. Entente cordiale, a warm welcome for President Macron at the White House, but a row over green subsidies threatens to overshadow his state visit.
Our other headlines: Spain on alert. Security stepped up after letter bombs are sent to the Prime Minister, embassies and government offices.
And Russia's foreign minister claims the United States and NATO are direct participants in the Ukraine war because of their support for Kyiv.
The head of NATO says the alliance is supporting a German-Norwegian initiative to help protect Europe's critical undersea infrastructure. This comes after attacks on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline in the Baltic Sea in September. The EU blamed Russia for the attacks, while Moscow pointed the finger at the UK. Jens Stoltenberg also warned of the dangers of economic over-reliance on Russia and China during a speech to the Berlin Security Conference. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Peter Oliver in Berlin. Peter, what did Stoltenberg have to say about NATO's role in protecting crucial underwater infrastructure?
Well, on Wednesday, he was asked by the Prime Minister of Norway and the Chancellor of Germany to provide assistance when it comes to protecting the underwater infrastructure, the subsea infrastructure of Europe. Well, on Thursday, Jens Stoltenberg has said that will happen, and a new operation will be starting from NATO forces to protect things like gas pipelines, as well as cables that go underneath the Baltic Sea, as well as other waterways around Europe, as well as other maritime waterways around Europe as well. Now, we heard from Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, who was alongside the NATO Secretary General as they were speaking to press, saying that what had happened with the Nord Stream pipeline showed that they had to have a complete re-evaluation of how undersea infrastructure was protected. Now, Nord Stream pipelines, of course, both Nord Stream 1 and 2, if you cast your minds back to September, they ruptured dramatically, spewing gas into the Baltic Sea, those pipelines that ran from Russia to northern Germany. Now, investigations are underway, several investigations into what caused that. Almost every one of those investigations is operating on the assumption that this was a deliberate act. And in fact, the Swedish investigation said that they found explosives or traces of explosives at the scene of those pipeline ruptures. Now, Jens Stoltenberg said that because of what had been asked for and what had gone on with Nord Stream, NATO would be forthcoming.
We need to do more to help protect this vital infrastructure. So I welcome the German-Norwegian initiative to establish a NATO undersea infrastructure centre. Such a centre would provide allies with better situational awareness, map our vulnerabilities, and help deter and recover from any disruptive actions against allied undersea infrastructure.
What else did NATO's chief have to say?
Well, the Secretary-General and the German Chancellor got through quite a bit in what was a pretty short press conference. Jens Stoltenberg spoke about China. He was asked a question about NATO going forward with China. He said that as far as the alliance was concerned, they viewed Beijing as a systematic challenge, but he was very keen to stress that China was not viewed by NATO as an adversary and that there should continue to be a relationship and certainly trade between NATO members and Beijing. He also spoke about Ukraine quite a lot, as you would imagine. There were talks about getting supplies and ammunition and other military hardware to Ukraine. There was also a pledge of continued and unwavering...
The US citizen who admitted killing a 19-year-old motorcyclist by careless driving will be sentenced next Thursday. Anne Sekulas hit Harry Dunn when she was driving on the wrong side of the road outside a US military base in the UK. As the wife of a diplomat, she was granted immunity by the US government and was able to leave the UK 19 days later. The sentencing had been due today, but it was postponed to allow it to be televised.
China has signalled a new approach in its coronavirus policy, with dozens of districts in Shanghai and Guangzhou easing lockdowns. Restrictions have also been relaxed in the city of Chongqing. China's vice premier says the ability of the virus to cause disease is now weakening.
Residents in parts of Guangzhou have been under lockdown for several weeks.
As our correspondent Huang Fei now reports, they are now being released.
More than a month since a cluster outbreak put this neighborhood under a stay-at-home order, people are finally getting out. Residents can apply to leave if their building has no new cases for 3 consecutive days. They will also need to show 5 negative COVID test results and finish 3 days of home quarantine.
We are going back to Hunan province. We were excited all night. The weather hasn't been kind lately, but the community staff never stopped working. They kept making the rounds and delivered essentials. Thank you all.
Nearly 10,000 residents are opting to leave as their neighborhood continues to battle new infections. They will be shuttled to the railway station, where they will board high-speed trains heading home or to their new jobs. Although a few told us they plan to come back after the Chinese New Year.
We check the residents' COVID results every day and find out whether they would like to leave and where they would like to go. We've been going door to door. Most people do welcome the effort.
The infections around China's largest textile trading market has led to a citywide containment effort, closing public transportation, classrooms, and dine-in services in most districts. But on Wednesday, much of the city reopened after a new message from the municipal government.
We will take a more surgical approach to determine high-risk areas. Precise zoning is key to quick containment and screening, and therefore will allow us to reopen quickly. We hope to minimize the impact on everyday life.
The Guangzhou government is continuing to ease closures across the city and has vowed to implement the National Health Commission's 20-point guidelines in a more timely, efficient, and precise manner. Notably, officials are calling for confidence in the business community, saying they've set up task forces to help key industries navigate COVID disruptions. Huang Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
HIV was identified first in the early 1980s, and even now there are estimated to be around 1 million new infections each year.
World AIDS Day, marked on the 1st of December each year, is a chance to raise awareness, and in China's Sichuan province, volunteers encourage those infected to seek treatment and reduce the stigma of HIV. Our correspondent Zheng Songwu reports.
The human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, was first clinically observed in the 1980s. The WHO says over 38 million people were living with HIV worldwide by the end of 2021, with over 1 million of them in China. Although there's no cure yet for HIV and AIDS, treatment is widely available. The Public Health Clinical Center of Chengdu is the leading provider for HIV treatment in Sichuan province, serving more than 4,000 people living with HIV.
People over 60 with HIV usually develop AIDS-related diseases, such as kidney failure or diabetes. We offer them medicines with more curative properties and few side effects on their major organs, as we do with young and middle-aged people who have HIV. We also work with other departments to treat people who have developed complications. Medical insurance covers 75% of the fees. Patients can get free medicines or those covered by insurance.
Dr. He says about 20% of the people with HIV or AIDS in Sichuan are senior citizens. The rest are young to middle-aged people. Around 95% of the cases are linked to sexual transmissions, with an increase among men who have sex with men. Apart from providing treatment for people with HIV or people who have AIDS, raising awareness about AIDS and its prevention is also crucial. And this is not an easy job because sometimes it takes years for volunteers to convince patients to take treatment. Mr. Zhang was diagnosed with HIV in 2010, but it wasn't until a decade later that he thought treatment.
I wanted to get treatment, but I was worried something bad would happen. I was worried my family and friends would discriminate against me and I wouldn't be able to find a job. I had to keep myself unexposed. Otherwise, I'd feel terrible for having HIV in my body.
Zhou Jian works with the AIDS Prevention Association in Chengdu. For years, the group of volunteers have been offering counseling to people with HIV. And Zhang was one of the people Zhou Jian successfully convinced to get treated.
We raise people's awareness in several ways. In rural areas, we provide consulting services at farmers' markets or their villages. Sometimes we hold activities to gather attention. Each district has a volunteer at an urban area, sharing knowledge on treatment and prevention.
Zhou says people used to be scared to talk about HIV and AIDS, but now there's less apprehension, with more people getting more knowledge, as well as people like Mr. Zhang being open to treatments that enable most people with the virus to live a long and healthy life. Zheng Song, CGTN, Sichuan Province.
Spain is still one of the favourites in Qatar. The 2010 winners arrived with a youthful squad and faced Japan later, knowing a draw would be good enough to reach the knockouts.
But can they go all the way and win a second title? The former Spanish striker David Villa thinks it's possible, and he's been talking to CGTN's correspondent Dan Williams.
Spain called the eye in their opening World Cup match, beating Costa Rica 7-0. And the 2010 winners also looked comfortable against Germany, although a late German goal saw the game end in a draw. The Spanish squad is brimming with young, talented players, and Spain's legendary striker David Villa is impressed with what he has seen so far.
I'm very happy and very proud of the way that they are playing. They did two great games. Obviously the first one with 7-0, but in the second one against Germany, it was good. I was in the stadium. I think Spain played very well 65-70 minutes. After that, Germany was a little bit in the last minute a little bit better, and he and he scored the draw. But I'm very happy. They are playing well, and I am very confident with the way that Spain is playing.
Obviously, the next challenge is against Japan. What are your expectations for this one? Difficult
game because Japan is a team that is very strong. They run a lot. They are so people that fighting until the last minute. Physically, they are strong because they have the capacity. But I believe that Spain, if they will do the same that they did in the first two games, can have chance to win in the game and go to the next stage.
Spain are looking to improve their recent World Cup record. Since winning the competition in South Africa, they won just 3 out of 9 World Cup matches. But perhaps the class of 2022 can give their fans something to celebrate once again. Dan Williams, CGTN, Doha.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. More from the World Cup in Qatar, where footballing history is being made with an all-female refereeing trio taking charge of a men's finals match for the first time ever.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The team ranked second in the world are on the verge of a shock early World Cup exit. Belgium are drawing 0-0 with 2018 finalist Croatia, knowing that only a win will ensure qualification for the last 16.
And Morocco looks set for a place in the round of 16 for only the second time in their history. They're beating Canada by 2-1 in the other game in Group F. As long as they avoid defeat, they're through.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dan Williams in Doha. Dan, if things stay the way they are, a real shock in Group F.
That's right, absolutely, yeah. A lot of people had Belgium to once again have another good tournament here. They've obviously got this so-called golden generation of players, some of them starting to enter more into their twilight years, but still it's a very, very strong squad indeed. And yeah, as you say, on the verge of going out. Of course, they got off to a narrow victory over Canada, but that 2-0 defeat to Morocco last time out really put their whole World Cup now in doubt. And just with a few minutes left, it looks like they are on their way out. They are piling forward. We saw Lukaku hit the post a little earlier. It seems like he's had another chance, just not go in for them, but it looks like Belgium's heading out. And as you say, Morocco really ripped up the form book here. They obviously beat Belgium last time out, and now on the verge of beating Canada. Canada are obviously already out of this competition, but if that result stands, then Morocco go through as group winners.
And Germany could also face an early exit.
That's right, yeah. As they did 4 years ago, of course. It's almost unreal to think of a German side going out of a World Cup at the first round. That's something that not normally isn't normal for World Cup watchers to witness. Yeah, they're up against Costa Rica. They need a win, and they also need a favour in the other game as well. They only have a point, of course, that after they had that shock defeat to Japan and could only manage a draw against Spain. So really Germany with it all to do in that game. Costa Rica themselves, so they got a chance still themselves of going through. They bounced back from that 7-0 defeat to Spain to beat Japan narrowly. So they could go through if they also win. The other game, though, as well, is going to also be really fascinating. Spain, they're sitting pretty, of course, with that excellent goal difference from that first game against Costa Rica. They have 4 points. A win or a draw will be enough against Japan. But Japan, if they were to win that one, they themselves would go through in the group. And really, that would be another major upset. Of course, they beat Germany. They lost to Costa Rica. So they're looking for another big scalp here this evening.
Dan, good to talk to you. Thanks for that. Enjoy the football. Dan Williams, our correspondent in Doha.
History will be made in Qatar in a few hours, with an all-female refereeing team taking charge of a men's World Cup match for the very first time. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall reports.
It's been a World Cup of many firsts, and when Germany versus Costa Rica kicks off, France's Stephanie Frappart will become the first ever female referee at a men's World Cup match. Costa Rica's manager says it'll be a special moment.
I have profound admiration for everything women have conquered, and I like that they want to keep on conquering things. This is another step forward that speaks volumes for this woman and her commitment to doing things, and especially in the sport, which is a very sexist one. It's a situation that's good for football, a very positive step for football, and it means opening up football more for everyone.
Frappart is used to breaking records. Last week, she became the first female fourth official at a World Cup. She also holds the record for being the first woman to take charge of a men's World Cup qualifier and a men's Champions League match.
I think I'll have everything that's around me in mind, but the aim will still be the same, to referee the game properly. So I'm really going to head into this with enormous emotion. But you have to channel that, because clearly the important thing is what happens on the pitch.
Frappart will be joined by assistants Neo Sabak from Brazil and Mexico's Karen Diaz. 2 other female referees from Rwanda and Japan are also officiating at the tournament. But a female referee has never taken charge of a game in the English Premier League or Spain's La Liga, 2 of the world's top divisions. The referees are hoping their appearances at the World Cup will help open doors for more women in the elite men's game.
So being here, it means we deserve to be here. It's not a chance, it's not because we are women. We have been working hard to be here, and we deserve to be here, so that we're going to work hard and then to show the world that we deserve to be here and we want to win.
And there can't be many better ways to get visibility than taking centre stage at one of the world's most watched tournaments in a must-win game for 4 times world champions Germany. Siobhan McCall, CGTN.
A Portuguese conservation scheme is on a mission to protect wolves using a secret weapon, guardian dogs.
For thousands of years, these animals worked alongside shepherds to protect against wolf attacks.
But as these predators declined, so did the numbers of guardian dogs, who were replaced with smaller, more affordable animals. CGTN's Neil Cairns reports.
Lisbon is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Today it's a thriving modern place. But just 40 kilometres that way, there'll be wolves.
The Iberian Wolf Recovery Centre covers 18 hectares of woodland where rescued wolves can live in a natural environment, and scientific studies can be made about their ecology and behaviour. It's also a place to educate the public about the importance of their conservation.
How many wolves do you think there are now in Portugal?
About 350. But you must think that we are connected with the wolf population in Spain, and so this is a big Iberian wolf population.
You know, the wolf, it seems to me the wolf has a really bad reputation, an undeserved bad reputation. Why is that?
To me, we don't like, or we persecute things that we do not understand. The main problem is the wolf prey on domestic animals, and we also have a big damage done by wolves on the livestock, for example.
Which is where the guardian dogs come in.
That's it.
We're heading north to meet a goat herder who's using guardian dogs to help protect his flock against wolf attacks. He gets his dogs from Grupo Lobo biologist Silvia Ribeiro. These mild-mannered dogs reduce attacks on livestock and therefore stop farmers from wanting to kill wolves.
Claro, matam, não é que seja bom, mas os cães também não deixam.
So the problem is that they kill livestock, which is not good for him.
Yes.
But the dogs, they don't let him get near the farm.
Já para aí há 15 anos que não tenho prejuízo.
Since he has these dogs for 15 years, he never had a damage.
So the program started in 1996.
Yeah.
So for 26 years,
Yes.
you've been giving these dogs to farmers.
Yes, me and some colleagues, yes, but I've stayed on.
Did farmers have guardian dogs before that?
In the places where we started this program, no, they didn't. That's why the program was needed. And they used usually small hunting dogs or dogs that were not properly raised with the livestock, so they didn't establish those bonds, social bonds, which are important for them to work as they grow up.
Hello. So the bonding starts straight away by putting him here with the cattle.
Well, he was with cows already, his family,
right,
so
home,
it could have started already, yeah.
Okay. But he will be left here tonight with these...
Yeah, now he will be left here for at least 2 weeks or more.
Yes.
Until they get used to one another, and then he will stay in a part of the stable where he's protected from the cows and where he will be fed, and then in a couple of days he can get out and see how they react to him, and if he's not afraid and if they're not threatening him, because it's very small and it could be hurt.
Yeah.
But they are already used to dogs.
He'll grow to be a guardian of the livestock, but by doing that, he's also a guardian of the wolves he keeps at bay.
Neil Cairns from our science show Razor ending that report. And if you want to see more stories like that, go to YouTube and search for Razor Science.
I just want to give you a quick update on the World Cup. Belgium, the team ranked second in the world, as we were reporting, are out of the tournament, having failed to beat Croatia.
The headlines again. Entente cordiale, a warm welcome for President Macron at the White House, but a row over green subsidies threatens to overshadow his state visit.
Our other headlines: Russia's foreign minister claims the United States and NATO are direct participants in the Ukraine war because of their support for Kyiv.
And Spain on alert. Security stepped up after letter bombs are sent to the Prime Minister, embassies and government offices.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK,